in the same way that a human would. No, then of course you could have a quite shallow model, a deep learning model basically, that have seen examples of human reacting to this behavior. For example, a gaze behavior, some gaze aversion or some. Then you only need the system to behave or answer sort of in the same way as a human would.
Hello and welcome. The following is a conversation with Hedvig Kjellström, professor at the Division of Robotics, Perception and Learning at KTH, also associated with the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Silo AI, and the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Her research in computer vision and machine learning focuses on enabling AI systems to interpret human and animal behavior, and also the embodiment of these systems. Her work has been a true source of inspiration for me and many others. I was deeply honored that she agreed to participate in this podcast. I hope that you enjoy the program. If we start from the beginning of an interaction between a human and an AI system, how do we create AI systems that can interpret human interactions in sense of our facial expressions and our tone of voice?
Yeah. Let me first say that I think it's great just to create systems to which you can speak naturally, communicate in a human-like fashion. And then, we come a long way in speech interaction, like understanding human speech and also producing synthetic speech. But as you say, it would be really nice to have to also have the machine or the system understanding your non-verbal communication, for example, facial expressions, and also head motion and upper body motion and gestures. And the tone of voice, I see it also as a non-verbal cue, because it's not part of the speech really. It's more like signal that you emit. There is a lot of computer vision and machine learning methodology for in extracting body pose and facial expression from video, and also extracting cues from speech signals. And then there is a lot of methodology for interpreting that. You could, for example, classifying facial expression in terms of some coding systems, such as the facial action coding system, where you detect muscle activations in the face, and then you could relate that to certain, detecting when someone smiles, for example.
And do we try in any ways to mimic the human means of interpreting these things? And by that I mean that when we have a discussion, I'm trying to, in some ways, even unconsciously, interpret your nonverbal behavior. And there exists this perhaps still not completely clear behavior in our brain that is going on, in our motor cortex. Do we try to understand that and try in any ways to mimic our behavior, or do we start from scratch in some ways?
Yeah, there is quite a lot of knowledge on why and how humans produce facial expressions and how they are connected to. I'm not sure it's very meaningful to connect them to these kind of template feelings that we sometimes see, like happiness, anger, and so on. I mean, in a conversational context, it's not really interesting to know if someone is 93% happy or, but it's rather interesting to understand something about like attitude, or if your communicating partner understands what you're saying, and also so attitude and sort of it's like interest level maybe, and also turn taking is really important. So it's kind of a social lubricant or something that you see if the other person is trying to say something, and then you can leave over the word in a seamless fashion. And you also use a gaze a lot to communicate. It's like you look away while you're thinking, like I'm doing now. And then when you're done speaking, you look back. And then that's a turn-taking cue. It says that. Okay.
So how do we implement that in robots?
Yeah, so a lot of so like facial expression cues can be detected from video, and there is a lot of techniques. It's like off-the-shelf techniques such as open pose and so on for extracting facial landmarks and tracking faces and extracting features. And for gaze, there are a number of hardware, it's like Tobii glasses or Tobii trackers that you can put on your screen so you could have an interface where the user's eyes are tracked so that you...
I wonder if any of the new generative approaches have been attempted to, because so far I would say many of the approaches are mostly deep learning and ML based, which are of course very closely all related, but generative approaches that do not necessarily have any predefined dispositions, but simply go on based on a pre-training of the model and then allowing it to kind of roam free to be able to create its own definitions.
So generative models, I think that's a very wide class of models. So they are deep learning models, and the thing with them is that you model the whole process by which the data has been produced. And you're right that such models could be used for partly supervised learning, so that you sort of, if you have a corpus of facial motion, then you can sort of explore that corpus and learn common patterns, then you could, if you had labels on some examples of that pattern, then you could label the others as well. So you're right. Yeah, and of course that has been done. There is a paper that was published in October, so very recently, called Motion BERT. So BERT is this embedding method for speech. So there they associated human body motion with different activities. So they both, from a video of a person doing an activity, they generate the 3D pose and shape of the person, and they also generate a verbal expression, or not a verbal, but a semantic sort of like clapping or doing a karate kick or something. And that is I mean, it's using these foundation models. Maybe that's what you're aiming at.
Yeah, I would say perhaps calling them foundation models.
So models that know a lot about speech, language in general, for example. So these models know a lot about motion and language in general. So by that you can, instead of having a sort of a language level on every training example, they instead use this enormous embedding and this BERT embedding of language to sort of, if they have seen a example of swing dance and then they see an example of a jazz dance, which is kind of similar, then these two, the swing dance and jazz dance, will be close in the language embedding, and then it will find like similar motions. Yeah.
So, do you think that the next state for these, or perhaps not necessarily the next state, but simply if we want to widen the prospects of these large language models in terms of human interaction and implementing visual systems in them, connecting them with different techniques of interpretation of human nonverbal expressions could be the next state for them.
Yeah, that's a really nice application, absolutely.
And how much do we need to understand these behaviors on a human level to be able to replicate them, if one might say? I face this question quite a lot when it comes to AI, especially when it comes to the arts, where we don't necessarily have any predefined definitions for what they are, and yet AI models can create them.
What do you mean with replicate? So do you mean like an embodied AI agent would replicate the nonverbal behavior, or?
Well, I would say that AI models not necessarily replicate our behavior, but replicate a capability that humans have in terms of interpretation.
Yeah, exactly. So they should react to the behavior you emit in the same way, or sorry, that the communication partner emits in the same way that a human would. No, then of course I mean, you could have a quite shallow model, a deep learning model, basically, that have seen examples of human reacting to this behavior. For example, a gaze behavior, some gaze aversion or some. Then you only need the system to behave or like answer sort of in the same way as a human would. And of course, you don't know if this computer has sort of replicated the whole process, underlying process by which the human. Probably not, because our brain is so complex.
But do you think that we have to, or perhaps is it even necessary to start studying the brain more in depth to be able to create more optimized models to do that?
I don't think, it depends what the goal is. If the goal is to create a sort of smooth and efficient communication partner, then it doesn't really have to know about. I don't think it has to have a very deep knowledge about the underlying mechanisms for our behavior that comes from like escaping instincts, like in the Stone Age. But it just have to know about sort of patterns. But if you want to do something, so I think with conversational agents, maybe you don't have to be sort of very deep. But if you go into, like you said, if you want to create agents that are that create novel things, create art, for example, then you really have to understand about mechanisms in the brain for, I think it's a combination of reasoning and more unconscious sort of communication in the brain. So yeah, then I think I don't think you have to, but it's probably a good idea to look at, because humans are the only agents that are able to create. So it's good to study them and try to understand how they do it.
There was this paper that came from MIT a few months back about that studied through functional MRIs the behavior of the brain when doing different types of tasks, such as interpreting language or a mathematical question. And when they compared it to a neural network, AI neural network, the behaviors were quite similar to one another. And of course, that in itself is quite a baffling thing to realize. But I always wonder if we have to some degrees, try to replicate more the behavior of our own brains to create more capable models, or can we keep on pushing more data into such models, such as generative models?
I actually think that we need to think about what the differences are. So I think it's a bit of a dead end to start growing the models. I mean, having more and more training data, because this is not really what humans do, right? So we're able to learn. So humans as a species has seen a lot of data, but there are a lot of bottlenecks. Like every agent that is born with it's like hard-coded rudimentary brain, and which comes from earlier generations. But essentially, there is no data saved from earlier generations. So there has been a huge bottleneck. So the only communication from the earlier generations is in the genes, basically, which is kind of sparse representation compared to what the brain is. And then the human learns during its lifetime, and then develops, and there is a selection. I mean, that basically there is a random variation between humans, and some survive better than others, and then you transfer your genes. But basically, there are a number of bottlenecks all the time. So I think there is something to that we should think about, that these bottlenecks, they are important somehow. And this ability that humans have on like learning new tasks from just like doing few-shot learning or zero-shot learning by reasoning about it's like totally different contexts, but it's like
Applying the same type of knowledge into different tasks.
Very new tasks, yeah. I think that is essential for example, creativity. And that comes from, so there's something with our embodiment, and we learn through interaction with the world, through our senses and through our actuators, the arms, basically.
Now, that's a fascinating subject to further delve on upon, but do you think that the current transformer models are capable of having any sense of creativity? Now, that's, of course, I must admit, we don't have necessarily a defined definition of creativity, but
No, exactly. So I don't know. I mean, transformers is just one method for learning very long distance relationships. So I'm not sure if it's in the.
but better to say the GPT models, the generative pre-trained transformers. So
Oh yeah, exactly. The large language
Language models.
models. I'm not sure. It depends what you mean with creativity, but one definition of creativity could be that you're able to create something that is like new and surprising that someone has not thought about before, and that at the same time it's useful according to some measure. It's sort of interesting, or it's it's a tool that can solve something. And that's creative. Yeah, but basically a large language model, all it does is combining all lots of patterns that it has seen. It has no sort of deeper, there is no organized knowledge in it. The only thing it can do is to generate the next word. But maybe that's what humans do as well.
that is something that I must admit, especially when it comes to the visual arts, I sometimes going to museums think that maybe is what artists do, simply combine different methods together and create a new method. And is it possible for these large language models now connected with visual diffusion models to create new forms of art?
Absolutely, yeah. But I think art is more than creativity in that sense. The ability to put together new things or old things in new ways, and I also think it's important with the experience that the artist is trying to convey. And this goes back to this embodied thing that I talked about before, that human artists, they have like lived and experienced things with their senses, and they have a memory of earlier things in their past, and these earlier experiences and their knowledge is sort of encoded in this new thing, while a large language model only has a lot of information that others have provided it. It's like a student that has read a lot of books but has done nothing on his or her own, if you see what I mean. So I think that if we talk about AI and art, I'm not sure if it's very. It might be useful with a painting done by an AI system. I mean, it's nice, you can put it on the wall, but the question is if it has meaning in the same way if a human has done it.
But do you think that these large language models have any, and I think to some degree you touched upon it, that you don't, but have any understanding? And by that I mean Max Tegmark usually is of the position that they do have some understanding, and points to the fact that some of these llama models have been able to create geographic interpretations of the world despite the fact that they don't have any visual data put into them. And they have some sense of room and what a 3D room might look like. Do you think that through language alone we are capable of creating a deeper sense of understanding, or we need embodied models?
I think we need embodiment. Going back to Kant, it's like, and there has been a lot of philosophers after Kant as well, saying that phenomenology, that you have it's not meaningful to have a sort of a brain without a body. So sort of reasoning is not meaningful without having feelings and being able to do things. So I think it's probably encoded in language, like 3D, because language is used to describe the world we live in. So I think it's encoded. So in that sense, I agree with Max Tegmark, but there are a lot of other things I don't agree with. But I agree with that, that probably these large language models have captured the structure in language, which is really amazing, and including like descriptions of the 3D world and the world geographics and so on. But still, I like to return to that. I'm not sure if it's any meaningful. It's like you can ask a large language model to write a poem about love, but it doesn't mean that it understands about love. It just means that it's able to scramble together a lot of poems about love and sort of learn how poems about love should sound like, and then produce one. Or even produce a new poem that sounds exactly like Shakespeare. But it doesn't mean that it has the same kind of philosophical insights as Shakespeare had, that he conveyed in his texts.
But, and this is perhaps a testament to the brilliance of Alan Turing and the Turing test, of saying that the best way to measure the capabilities of AI models is through conversations with them, and whether they can make us believe that they are a conscious being or not. Does it even matter that they don't understand? And this is perhaps a personal question. It's not necessarily something that
I never
so
thought about
scientific.
that. That's a very interesting question. I don't think that the Turing... So I think that these large language models have passed the Turing test, as he formulated it in 1959 or something. But I don't think that's enough for the model to have a human understanding. Because the model... But we don't know. Maybe the model has learned how to feel love. It's very hard to measure. And I'm not sure how to measure it at all.
But from our perspective, I mean, I don't know if you know what love is.
No,
but,
exactly.
So
maybe I'm a psychopath that is not able to feel love. No, exactly.
No, but
no.
this goes a bit to the simulation theory, basically. That's the only proof that I have that other human beings have any interpretation of love is that I feel love, and I see that you're also a human being. So I think
exactly. So you project your own, and we do that with dogs, for example. So we project a lot of. We think that our dogs are sort of have the same kind of inner life as we do, and maybe they do, maybe not.
But that's
it's very hard to know.
That sets up a very good transition to the next subject, which is do dogs feel love? And more importantly, you work with this to some degree in your animal communication and behavior studies. When there is no language, at least not in the same sense that we have of it, how does the internal thought process for animals exactly work, and what are your ideas on it?
So when you study animals, there is a lot of people, ethologists, that have spent a lot of time studying animal behavior, and there are structural similarities in animal brains with all mammal brains. So so we know quite a lot about the brain mechanisms of different animals. You can look at the brain activity. You can look at heart rate and heart rate variability, our sort of inner systems with blood transfer and so on work quite similarly between subjects. You can measure neural signals, nerve signals in different animals, and they work quite similarly. So you know a lot about, I think it's called nociceptive signals, that you measure things that you can measure objectively. So you know quite a lot about that. There has also been a lot of study on facial expression in different animals. So you have done, still colleagues at the Agricultural University, where I'm a guest professor, they do studies where they dissect cow heads to look at where the muscles go and make, now they are making a facial action coding system for cows to express like the muscles that relate to facial expression for cows. There is already such systems for dogs, horses, sheep, cats. So for these animals, we know quite a lot about what different action units mean. So sort of when the animal is in pain, for example, these action units, like the inner brow raiser, which is like, you look sad. And it's also when you feel pain or stress or something. But we don't, but there is no way of asking the animal, sort of, they cannot describe what they feel. So you rely on some specialist describing from the outside.
But do you think that, I mean, and this is really a question that we don't necessarily even understand the human brain enough to answer it, but just on your personal thoughts, how can an animal have feelings, which at least if I'm not entirely projecting it on my dog, I believe she does.
Absolutely.
Without having language and having thoughts without language.
I think feelings are much
feelings perhaps
older,
are easier.
older in the system, in the brain development than language. So I have a colleague, ethologist colleague at SLU, who has done recordings of. So basically, you can produce feelings. So you can. So she has. They have beagle dogs there. You know, beagle dogs. They are really happy. It's like Snoopy dog. And they have induced, like, they know that if we give a meatball, the dog is going to be really happy. Or if we bring in the best person they know, they're going to be really happy. And this is like an axiom that you have to assume. And then they record the behavior, and then you can analyze the behavior versus some neutral state where they get, I don't know, something less tasty. So the only way you can explore feelings is by inducing like extreme states where you know.
A paper from the University of San Francisco was published this summer, where they had embedded a mesh on a human brain on a paralyzed woman, and through that they'd managed to interpret what her thoughts were in terms of language, and even a further study was able to detect a whole song, I believe it was Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd, simply through brain activity. Mm-hmm. Do you think that if we were to apply these AI models and put a mesh on an animal head, there could be some sort of a linguistic results that would come out? Or
I don't know enough about animal linguistics, but Yeah, it's interesting, but I think the parts in the human brain handling linguistics are vastly larger than in animals. But I mean, there are some animals that, so this chimpanzee, I don't remember her name, but it's a very famous chimpanzee
Yeah,
that
I
learned
sadly
sign language. And she also taught her son sign language. So it was kind of internalized language for her. And she could convey really abstract concepts such as grief, for example. But I mean, probably chimpanzees are extreme. I mean, they have a very large linguistic part of their brain compared to dogs, for example. So I guess it's depends on the species how how large your reasoning abilities. But this is really interesting. I'm reading a book right now on intelligence, and where they talk about octopuses. And I mean, octopuses, they are really, really smart. So they have done this kind of cognitive studies on octopuses, that they can reason and learn complex causal dependencies and so on. And they are not, their relationship to humans is like through some 2-cell organism, basically, or maybe 5-cell. So it's basically, it's like aliens, or I mean, there's no resemblance whatsoever. So it's a totally different form of intelligence. So maybe we don't, maybe we should study octopus brains and understand their linguistic.
Yeah, I mean, something that's always fascinating for me about octopuses, because I read slightly about them as well, is the fact that they are capable of dreaming, which is, I think, perhaps a interesting barrier, because when you are dreaming, at least from a human approach of looking at it, you have some sense of visual events that are happening, and maybe animals that are capable of dreaming have some sort of a visual type of thinking that is not dependent on language, but mostly on vision.
And they have some kind of memory. Otherwise, you cannot sort of recall things. But dogs, I mean, I'm sure your dog is dreaming. So.
Yeah,
Like they're like running in their sleep. Yeah, that's very cool.
But I wonder if this perhaps is also an indicator that so far we've really, some breakthroughs in AI have been through our studies of neural networks, which have been made possible to some degree based on our studies of the brain. Could there exist an approach of looking at intelligence from a perspective beyond human intelligence? Because it has been very human-centric, our approaches to AI so far. But could there be possible ways for interpreting intelligence in a different way?
I mean, so I'm not sure I agree it's always been human-centric. Oh, maybe it's always originating from humans, but the first approaches were like logical systems, and they were kind of disconnected from any organism. There you just try to build some reasoning system. But I think the idea of, I'm not sure if it's human-centric really, but it's definitely inspired by brains or biological systems that you connect many simple neurons. I could imagine that a system based on the same principles, but sort of developing further, could be more intelligent than a human. I think that maybe some animals are more intelligent than humans. It's very hard to know, but maybe with quantum computing you could create AI algorithms that are more efficient, use data more efficiently, for example, that are able to develop further.
And perhaps in a new fashion as well, beyond the. I mean, you mentioned the good old-fashioned AI, as it's called, but it's always a fascinating thought because a very famous historian, Yuval Noah Harari, normally speaks of AI as an alien creature that has a different way of thinking compared with humans. So I think that we have to have this humble approach towards it. Especially the current models have been large language models, been purely language based. But with quantum computing and some other focuses within AI studies, we perhaps can have new forms of intelligence that are emerge. But these are purely, of course, a speculation. But it's a beautiful thought nonetheless. Another fact that I think that we have to be conscious about is anthropomorphism, and both when it comes to animals and AI, there exists this element of anthropomorphism, I think, of perhaps projecting too many things on them. Do you have any concerns about that in society, the general society, anthropomorphizing perhaps too much about the current AI models?
I think that language is really, I mean, it's really impressive with a system that can use language in a way that appears to be human. So I think you can be a bit fooled by that. It's so I mean I come from a computer vision background, so I'm really sort of image centric. So I was actually much more impressed by these vision large models. They're also called large language models, which is strange, but you know, foundational vision models, because I find it much more impressive with a system that can generate naturalistic images than speech. But speech is very, I mean, it's a very human it's a typically human capability, so it becomes very easy to believe a system is this Turing test. It immediately passes the Turing test because you cannot say if it's a human, really. So I think we overestimate the intelligence of these systems, but then we should not underestimate them either. It's basically extremely impressive sort of database lookup systems that can find the fitting next word to produce a really human-like text. And that is super impressive. But I think that we anthropomorphize.
It's a hard word to say, I must admit.
That you project human abilities beyond language to a language model.
And do you, on that subject, believe that there should be a greater public discourse in terms of understanding AI models?
I think that it's a bit worrisome that the public discourse is very much directed towards fear of these systems, that, and especially that there is a great fear that these systems will suddenly take initiatives and become self-aware and start extinguishing humanity. But I think it's a far greater risk and much closer in time that humans with bad agendas use these systems for different purposes. We see that now in the conflict in Israel and Palestine, for example, that people use both produce a lot of fake news to affect public opinions, but also that people do not trust the actual genuine evidence because of the possibility that it might be fake. So you can push away really nasty images and say that, oh, it's probably just fake. And I think that's a real risk of AI, that it changes our way of taking in information, and that may have really large changes on society. And furthermore, no, sorry, now I lost track a bit. So I think it's really important that we, instead of, so I think that we should spend less sort of energy on worrying about the singularity, the point when AI systems become more intelligent than humans, and start focusing on like constructive things that we can do. Now we're starting to regulate the use of AI with the EU AI Act, for example. So I think it's necessary to find a way of regulating how we can use this new technology that is super powerful, so that it helps humanity instead of like destroying our society.
But how much do you think that there are many arguments on the side of regulation, but there are many also on the side against too heavy a regulation, such as the EU is proposing? Do you think that too much regulation can perhaps curtail the development? And
Absolutely. I think it's very, and it's also very, very hard to know sort of how to regulate things. And for sure, there is a lot of regulation of the wrong things, that you say that a system can never, we have to be able to inspect every part of the system. So, like, how are we gonna do that? It's not possible. Yeah, so it's really difficult, and we will probably see a lot of sort of mistakes in, and also that you can go around the legislation because it's written in a bad way.
And do you, now this goes slightly into politics, or regional politics, but there is this fear, especially between many EU companies, that too much regulation in the EU might lead to other continents, America and the Asian countries, be able to surpass.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I guess we have that in many other different businesses, like that our high salaries has moved all the manufacturing industry to other continents, for example. Yeah, so, but I think that some regulation is necessary, but then it must be sensible. There must be a balance. And that's really difficult. Yeah.
And in terms of the hardware of these AI systems, there currently is only a handful of AI companies that have the capability to have enough of these graphic processing units to be able to train these large language models, both the visual large language models and linguistic ones. Do you think that this is going to be a situation that is only going to continue, and or is there a possibility for models to become slightly simpler in the future?
I definitely think, like we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, that I think it's a bit of a dead end to only work towards more data, larger models. So we must eventually, and we will probably, find ways to maybe distill models down to smaller models that could be operated on a smaller machine, and also ways to learn more efficiently from data. And at the same time, I mean, already now there is a lot of work. So, for example, in Europe now, there is several initiatives on creating like open language models. There is one in Finland right now called Poro that was released just a couple of days ago, where they the model is open, so it's like open source, open data. So these kind of initiatives, and also the Swedish initiative, GPT-SWE, which is not entirely open, I think, but still these kind of initiatives are really good, that you have developed a multitude of models, so it's not only a few companies in the US that has language models.
The reason I raised this question is because, as you mentioned, it's a slight balancing act, but there exists a great fear that if there are more open source models available to the general public, then anyone can basically create their own language model. And unlike these large companies that face regulations, they can basically make it do much more horrible things, even though it might not necessarily be on the same scope.
But everyone faces regulations.
But I mean, you can basically train a Llama's, that is to say, Meta's open source version on your laptop if it's has a strong enough CPU.
But the regulations, I mean, if we have legislation that applies to all citizens, so you cannot do whatever you like just because you're not a company. But you're right. I mean, the more we spread knowledge, the more you could imagine countries in the world where maybe they wouldn't oppose such a development, but I think they can do this already today. I mean,
so just on that, so do you think that we should have more open source versions available?
Yeah, I think open source, open data, open knowledge sharing is the most robust. It's like democracy. It's a bit cumbersome, but it's the most robust way of organizing like knowledge development.
And on the open data, I recently had this workshop with students from the Royal Arts Academy, and there exists a tremendous degree of concern amongst them about how the data that they put up of their works is used by these companies.
But that is another thing. I think open data is nice, but attribution is really important. And that is totally missing today. And that's super important. And that's something you can regulate with legislation, that you have to list. And of course you can do that in a model. You can sort of backtrack from which training examples was this generated, so that you have sort of watermarks of So you could say for a new painting that is produced by an AI, you could say that this is 3% Monet and 2% some guy in the arts college, and so it's important with attribution.
And do you have, because this is a really ongoing debate about watermarking, but do you have any ideas about how best to have a watermark that can be detected throughout all uses of a picture? Because it's a very, I think about it quite often, about how to have a watermark that cannot later on be taken away simply.
Yeah, that's super difficult. I think it goes beyond AI. I think this is a problem on Pinterest or whatever, that it's basically stealing. Or if you publish your artwork and people can buy them, but someone downloads them and use them. No, I it's not my specialty, so I don't know. But.
Now, as we come closer to the end of this podcast, I wonder what are your greatest concerns and hopes for AI in the short term, let's say at least, and if we interpret the short term as the next 1 to 3 years.
So my greatest concern is what I talked about earlier, that for example, most young people, it seems like, get their news off social media. And your information flow in social media is heavily curated by an algorithm with the purpose to make you stay there, to raise your interest and make you feel stimulated. And then, of course, you steer that by your behavior, and then of course it changes so that many people have different, or everyone has different information flows. So, I mean, before people had different opinions about news, but now people see totally different news. So you have totally different world pictures, and that is kind of scary. And then also this thing with that the possibility of producing fake images, it's like deep fake, is so great, so that you don't know what to trust. So maybe people stop trusting information altogether and just live in some kind of foil hat bubble and sort of just trust what they like. And that, I don't think that makes the society very nice. So that is my greatest worry with AI. And I don't think that the way to address that is to put a ban on development of AI or something like that. I think we have to reconsider how we maybe we should put more effort in schools, in the education, to make people aware of this, so that people are more empowered to take in information. And that leads over to what I think is the greatest opportunity. It's really that using AI systems, people become really empowered. So for example, I have a lot of friends who live in houses, and they have an app controlling their energy costs. So they are like, oh, wow, I should start a dishwasher half an hour later, because then it becomes 3 öre billigare. And I think that's fantastic. I mean, you can have apps computing your carbon footprint for buying different kinds of apples, for example. Should I buy this apple that has gone by boat from Spain, or should I buy this apple that has been growing in a greenhouse? Or and that empowers us. It's like AI that gives us, makes us better at what we do. That's the best of AI.
Yeah, I mean that truly is, and I think it's we are getting closer and closer to that becoming a reality for many more people. So hopefully we'll have much more of that.
Yeah.
And for our last conversation topic, going back to embodied representation and AGI. Do you think that perhaps is a possible pathway to artificial general intelligence?
Yes. So maybe it's a bit opposing artificial general intelligence. So in the sense that you have a system that is totally just omnipotent and intelligent. But maybe intelligence has to be embodied in an agent in order to be meaningful. I don't know. But I think it's in order to reach some kind of real human level intelligence with reasoning capabilities. I think it's important with these bottlenecks that I talked about earlier, that you need to sort of compress information so that it becomes more generalizable. And that the best way to do that is by having bottlenecks.
Perhaps a last question is that if we do have robots with more capabilities and more AI implemented into them, do you think that's, what do you think are the prospects of jobs for humans in the future?
Yeah. So I don't think in general that the AI systems will take our jobs, but I think there are a lot of jobs that will change a lot and have changed a lot. Jobs involving the kind of capabilities that you can automate, such as writing standard texts. Can be automated so that you have one person operating 100 GPT 84 units that write really nice text. But I think you still need a human sort of proofreading and sort of managing this, but it maybe takes one human instead of 100 or something. And maybe the job of that human is less interesting. But I think there are other jobs that become more interesting, such as for doctors or clinicians. I think it might be more interesting to have a lot of support from image recognition systems, the radiology interpretation units and so on, that help them in their work, so that the human spends time on what is really difficult questions, and there is a lot of systems doing the basic stuff. So maybe it can, basically people that are able to use AI systems will outconquer people that are not using AI systems. And that's problematic, of course, in society, because I don't think it will be fewer jobs. I think there will be a lot of new jobs. It's like influencer. That wasn't a thing until social media.
Yeah, I mean, this week the cover of The Economist was the Omni Star, that basically AI systems will make it possible for more celebrities to be available in all languages. With Spotify's new AI, basically, they can we can record this podcast and it can be available in all languages.
Right.
So more celebrities and more real housewives, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. More influencers and less accountants and copywriters and so both good and bad. So I think there are a lot of people that will lose their jobs, and there will be misery because of that. Yeah.
But in the hope of it, the transition basically being one which is not too painful for human beings, I would like to thank you very much, Hedvig Kjellström, for participating in this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.